Welcome to All Things Considered, where we rate movies not just on how they turned out, but also on how they got there. We score each film out of 10 in 3 categories: the quality of the movie itself, the behind-the-scenes drama among the cast and crew, and also the film's production woes, from studio meddling to on-set disasters. Then we average it all out for a final score. So, for example, a bad movie that might normally score a 5 out of 10 might actually score an 8 when we take into consideration the chaos that went into making it. Today we're going to be taking a look at Justice League, or Justice League as some people call it, after director Joss Whedon. Justice League was supposed to be DC's answer to the Avengers, uniting its biggest heroes on screen. But what should have been an epic team-up spiraled into one of the messiest productions in modern Hollywood, shaped by rewrites, reshoots, and a change of director who feuded with and alienated the entire cast. The result was a Frankenstein monster of a movie that underperformed at the box office and was disliked by most critics and fans, before sparking a fan movement demanding the release of the original director's cut. So let's dive in and see how this film truly scores with all things considered. First, let's take a look at the film's production woes. Where to begin? Snyder had originally mapped out a trilogy of Justice League films, but when he began shooting the first one, production started hot off the heels of BVS, which would hit theaters 1 month before cameras on Justice League started rolling. And the reception to BVS was less than enthusiastic. Not only did it underperform at the box office relative to Warner Bros. Expectations for pitting Superman against Batman, but it was critically savage too. As a result of this, the studio started having cold feet about Snyder's vision, which they felt was too dark and humorless when compared to Marvel's more upbeat, bright, and funny movies. In order to stabilize the direction of the DCU, Warner Bros. Created DC Films, led by John Berg and Jeff Johns, the chief creative officer of DC Comics. And the first thing Johns would do is begin to rewrite Justice League. It got so bad that the actual writer on the film, Chris Terrio, would eventually complain, saying, "Maybe try using some of my pages?" Not only that, but Warner Bros. Mandated that either Johns or Berg had to be on set every day to babysit Snyder, to ensure he was making the film funnier and lighter. However, when Warner Bros. Saw the footage that Snyder had shot and Johns had rewritten, they were less than impressed, and convened a so-called footage summit where they assembled a room full of writers to watch what had been shot and suggest ways to fix it. One of those writers was Joss Whedon, who wrote and directed The Avengers and Avengers Age of Ultron, the very two films Warner Bros. Wanted to emulate. Eventually, Whedon would be hired, because why not just hire the guy whose films you're trying to copy? But originally, he was hired to just write new scenes that Snyder would direct. But it wasn't long before Whedon assumed more control, going from writing and advising to actually directing some of his newly written material himself. Apart from the film's tone, Snyder was getting pushed back in other areas. First, Warner Bros. Refused to let him dress Superman in his black suit, like when he's resurrected in the comics, fearing the suit was too scary. For the Snyder cut, the suit was digitally changed to black. Additionally, the studio mandated that the film be no more than 2 hours long. However, Snyder balked at this. Because each member of the Justice League hadn't got their own solo film before teaming up like the Avengers had done, he had to introduce Flash, Aquaman, and Cyborg in one film, make the audience care about them, and also introduce the film's villain, who again in Avengers had been previously introduced in Thor. This meant that to cram that all in, the film would have to be well over 2 hours, and Snyder didn't see how cutting it down was possible. Plus, he was being told by the studio that the film needed more heart and humor, yet he was being told to cut the scenes that he felt had heart and humor, that featured Flash and Cyborg's backstory. For Snyder, the conflicting messaging from the studio was maddening. Meanwhile, during all of this, Snyder's daughter tragically passed away, resulting in Snyder deciding to step down, as Joss Whedon would take over. However, it's worth pointing out that Snyder's time with DC was already coming to an end. Warner Bros. Was unhappy with his vision, and he was already being sidelined on his own film. Had he stayed on, he wouldn't have been asked back to complete his trilogy anyway. His time with DC was effectively over. So where does this land on a scale from 1 to 10 for production woes? This wasn't just studio notes or a runtime trim. The script was rewritten by multiple different writers. Executives were on set every day to babysit the director. There were mandated tonal shifts to inject more humor into the film, and the writer hired to punch up the script began directing his own scenes, all resulting in the director eventually quitting. While it's pretty bad, I have seen worse. So for those reasons, I'm going to give it a 9.2 out of 10. Now let's score the amount of behind the scenes drama. and boy was there a lot of it. Cyborg's Ray Fisher was the first to pull back the curtain, accusing Joss Whedon of gross, abusive, unprofessional, and completely unacceptable behavior on set. He also said Warner Brothers executives, including producer Jeff Johns and DC Films president Walter Hamada, had enabled the misconduct, vowing not to participate in any future DC production with Hamada's involvement. Fisher claimed Whedon belittled him and other actors and gave dismissive notes, while also removing most of his scenes from the final film. He further alleged that executives made racially charged remarks in the editing room, at one point saying Cyborg's skin tone appeared too dark on screen. Gal Gadot, meanwhile, raised concerns with Whedon that he was making Wonder Woman more aggressive than she had been in her own solo film. She wanted the portrayal to feel consistent from one film to the next. After pushing back, Whedon allegedly threatened her career, belittled Wonder Woman director Patty Jenkins, and told Gadot that he was the writer and she should shut up and say the lines, and that he could make her look incredibly stupid on screen if he chose to. Whedon would dispute both actors' claims, saying Gadot misunderstood him, citing that English wasn't her first language, and that Ray Fisher was a bad actor in both senses. However, Jason Momoa would back up both actors' claims, saying serious stuff went down, and it needs to be investigated, and people need to be held accountable. Warner Brothers would eventually open an internal investigation, later claiming that remedial action was taken, though nobody seems to know what that entailed, if anything. Affleck, a recovering alcoholic, would relapse during the tumultuous production under Whedon, calling it the worst experience of his professional life. He spent his downtime alone in his London hotel room drinking, saying he felt his only options were to drink or jump out the window. The whole thing left him so disillusioned that he abandoned plans to direct and star in his own solo Batman film. A close friend reportedly warned him that if he went through with another experience like Justice League, he would probably just drink himself to death. As for Henry Cavill, once he wrapped his scenes with Snyder, he moved on to shoot Mission Impossible Fallout, which required him to grow a mustache for the role. When Warner Brothers called him back for reshoots, Paramount refused to let him shave it, even though Warner Brothers offered to pay for a custom prosthetic mustache for Mission Impossible. That left Whedon stuck having to film Superman's new scenes with a mustache Cavill, which the VFX team then had to digitally erase. The result looked like and became one of the most ridiculed parts of the movie. So when it comes to scoring the film's behind-the-scenes drama, Justice League has it all. Public feuds, allegations of abuse, racial insensitivity, threats against actors, a star battling alcoholism, and even Mustache-Gate. Few productions in modern Hollywood have imploded this publicly and this messily, leaving scars on the cast, the franchise, and the studio itself, leading to several resignations, an investigation, and the end of a few careers, like Whedon's. For sheer chaos, this one's a doozy. I'm going to give it a 9.6 out of 10 on the behind-the-scenes drama scale. As for the movie itself, yikes. What was supposed to be DC's answer to the Avengers ended up feeling like a bargain bin knockoff, with the final result being a Frankenstein monster of two opposing tones. Snyder's darker vision and Whedon's forced, lighter, sometimes cringier humor. Whedon even recycled one of his most infamous gags from Age of Ultron, having Flash stumble and land on Wonder Woman's chest, echoing Banner's fall onto Natasha's chest in Ultron. Whedon would also tack on the infamous Russian family subplot in the third act to add so-called real-world stakes, giving the audience someone to directly empathize with. But the family is no more than a cardboard cutout, with no development, introduced too late to matter, and doing nothing but slowing the movie down. Cutting back to their farmhouse during the final battle distracts from the Justice League's showdown with Steppenwolf. Instead of heightening the emotion, it feels like cheap manipulation, an awkward attempt at heart that only makes the climax look like the pilot of a bad TV show. Not only that, but by setting the climax inland, we don't get to see Aquaman really use his powers at all. Had the climax been set near a body of water, it could have showcased his abilities in a meaningful way, and given the character a real moment to shine. Visually, the climax is a mess too, as Whedon color corrected the sky into this hideous glowing red. It's distracting, ugly, and makes the whole finale look like it's taking place inside a lava lamp. Kind of like this video. Add to that the way Batman is reduced to a walking punchline, cracking awkward jokes instead of commanding the screen. Even more disappointing is the score. Danny Elfman, one of the greatest superhero composers ever, behind Spider-Man, Batman '89, and Ang Lee's Hulk, which is very underrated by the way, is barely recognizable here. You can't really even tell it's him. Instead of delivering something bold and memorable like Alan Silvestri did with the Avengers, there's no recognizable Justice League theme, and the rest of the music is totally forgettable, with Whedon pushing him to add old cues that don't fit from Batman '89 and John Williams' Superman. Still, there are tiny flashes, no pun intended, of what Justice League could have been. The sequence where Superman matches Flash's speed with just his eyes is genuinely thrilling and a great moment. And Aquaman accidentally spilling a soul while sitting on Wonder Woman's lasso is one of the only jokes that actually lands. The biggest issue, though, is that the movie is just boring. It's rarely engaging, rarely exciting, and never as epic as it's supposed to feel. And really, what's the point of assembling the Justice League if Superman is just going to swoop in at the last minute and effortlessly save the day? The film kind of undercuts its own premise, leaving the team itself feeling irrelevant. For a movie that was supposed to be the launch pad of an entire cinematic universe, Justice League does the opposite. It makes you less interested in seeing any more DCU films. On its own, the film's a turkey. It comes in at a 5.9 out of 10, but when you factor in the heavy studio interference and the chaos of behind-the-scenes drama, all things considered, Justice League rises to an 8.2 out of 10. A certified studio screwjob. Now, that's my score. Now it's your turn. Let me know in the comments below what score you'd give Justice League, all things considered. Thanks for watching, everybody, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more of Hollywood's untold stories and unmade movies.